Hey, what is up, guys? This is Conrad64. How you guys are doing today? I'm back with another video. And for this video, I'm going to be talking about Sonic Racing Crossworlds. I'm going to be talking about the DLC and giving my thoughts about this is kind of like a speculation video on wondering like how long will the DLC last? Will it be available for how long? And I'll get into all that later. But I'll go into more details and a lot of stuff. Well, I just want to show you guys. Hey guys, hope you guys like my t-shirt. Shirt. My mom got it for me off of Temu. It's pretty nice. Yeah, we got more. I got more cereal themed t-shirt or shirts. Yeah. And I'm gonna be wearing one of them later. Fruit roll-ups, I think, something like that. I forgot what it was. It was a red one. But anyways, so I'm gonna get now for this real meeting read of the video is I'm gonna be talking about the DLC for Sonic Racing Crossworlds, and I'm thinking about how long will the DLC last? How long will the DLC be available? Now, you see, Sonic Racing Crossworlds, like the DLC, mostly have kind of consisted of non-Sonic characters. Okay, sure, we only have two Sonic characters, Tango and Whisper as DLC, and the Sonic characters from Sonic Prime, alternate versions of Tails, Knuckles, and Amy. I don't know if that's still available. I think it is. Well, last time I checked, I wasn't able to click on it to buy the characters, so I don't know. I don't know if that was a special deal or something. I don't know. But the rest, aside from that, the rest of the DLC characters have kind of all been, characters from different, non-Sonic characters. Different Sega characters, different video game characters, but not just video game characters, but also characters from other media, cartoon characters, like SpongeBob, and coming soon, we're gonna have, the Ninja Turtles, and Avatar characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So Sonic Racing Crossworlds is going above and beyond with all its DLC guest characters. Guest characters as DLC. And now this does, and of course, yeah, we have other video game characters. Mega Man characters, Mega Man and Proto Man, Pac-Man and the Ghosts, and the Minecraft characters. So it's pretty cool right there. Everything's a cool package right there. But the main thing I'm kind of wondering is how long will the DLC last? That's pretty much what I'm wondering. Because here's the thing: the fact that that they have a lot of characters, the DLCs mostly have a lot of characters that are not owned by Sega. We only have a few characters owned by Sega. The ones that are owned by Sega, they're added in that free DLC. We have Knights from Knights into Dreams, I from Super Monkey Ball, Red from Angry Birds, a property that Sega recently brought years ago. Persona, another IP, Joker from Persona, another IP that Sega recently brought. But I don't know if they still own Bayonetta. They could probably still own Bayonetta. And the other guy, the Yakuza, I think that's the guy in the red, the red suit and the curly hair, and that pirate character, who they're both from the same series. I don't know what the name series they're from. And now in May we're getting this new character. I forgot her name. She's from like a Tetris. I think a Tetris like game, something like that. She's coming in May. So yeah, the Sega characters are pretty much added for free because Sega owns those characters. But the other DLC characters, guest characters, the DLC characters like Pac-Man, Minecraft, Pac-Man, Mega Man, and SpongeBob. Those kind of characters, you have to buy them basically. See? But the main thing I'm thinking about the DLC mainly the DLC for the Mega Man, Pac-Man, Minecraft, and SpongeBob characters. The main thing is kind of mainly circled around those four IPs, and even Ninja Turtles and Avatar when those get added on, and possibly any possible other third party non special guest company characters like if the game were to add like what if Sonic Racing Crossworlds were to add Bluey, for example. No, I know it's not gonna happen. I'm saying like that for example, or Paw Patrol characters. Unlikely, I know, but that's just like an example. Or My Little Pony characters, like something like that, you know. But because the thing is, basically, I do think that maybe I don't think there probably will be an issue with Mega Man, Minecraft, and Pac-Man with those IPs. But I do think the problem will be for like SpongeBob and even Avatar and Ninja Turtles when those get added, the Nickelodeon stuff. I'll say Nickelodeon stuff. And the reason why why I think all this like the DLC for those franchises like the Nickelodeon stuff and even the video game franchise Minecraft, Mega Man, and Pac-Man that I mentioned earlier. The reason why I think there will be a problem with the DLC with all those franchises is because of one thing only, and it begins with the letter L. And that word is the word is licensing. Yep. So apparently, since that Sega got to use like the Nickelodeon IPs and the other video game IPs, Sega basically had to do licensing to get those franchises to get them as guest characters in Sonic Racing Crossworlds. With the other Sega characters like Knights, Red, II, Joker, and Joker, there was no problem right there because Sega owns those characters. They can easily decide to just put those characters in if they want to, This is something that I think Mario Kart World should have done. They should have added some more Nintendo characters. I don't think licensing is a big deal right there because Nintendo owns Mario, Nintendo owns Zelda, Nintendo owns Metroid, Nintendo owns Star Fox. Nintendo owns Kid Icarus, Nintendo owns Animal Crossing. You get what I'm saying? They own a lot of franchises, so they can easily decide to just put those characters in, I guess, characters they want to. Zelda, Animal Crossing, and Splatoon got special guest appearance in Mario Kart Deluxe 8. So why couldn't they do the same thing with Mario Kart World? This is something like that. So like Sega, they had no problem adding some of the other Sega characters as DLC because they're doing it because they own those franchises, and they added those characters in that DLC. But the problem with with Pac-Man, Minecraft, Mega Man, and the Nickelodeon IPs, is that they were added in, but Sega had to license them. You see what I mean? And one thing that I'm thinking about is like how long will the DLC last? Like how long will the SpongeBob DLC last? And how long with the Mega Man license? How long will that last? And like Minecraft, Pac-Man, like how long will those DLC last? Will those DLC last for like a couple of years? Because there might come a point where the DLC for those will eventually get delisted. They'll get delisted. Because, and one of the reasons why I say that is because sometimes licensing ends because the thing with licensing is that you have to like if you want to add like a guest character in your game, you have to make like some kind of agreement with the other company. Like let's say if they want to add Tifa Lockhart as a guest character in Dead or Alive in the next Dead or Alive game, Koei Tecmo, the company that owns Dead or Alive, they need to go to the company that owns Tifa Lockhart, which is Square Enix, and they need to like reach an agreement with Square Enix to see if they can put Tifa Lockhart in the game. Something like that. And there's a rumor that Tifa Lockhart is coming to Street Fighter 6. We don't know how true that is, but more evidence have seen it come out, so it is indicating that it is true that she's coming to Street Fighter 6. If that is true, that's very exciting. I can't wait to see a one-on-one fight between her and Chun-Li, which I think a lot of us has been wanting to see for a long time. So something like that, and like how Dead or Alive 6 last round doesn't have the King of Fighter characters, doesn't have Mai and Kula, and that's mainly because of licensing, because they didn't really renew. Koei Tecmo didn't renew the license to put those characters in. That's from what I heard. So yeah, so in order to put these characters in the game, in order to put your character in a character that you don't own inside your game as a guest character, you need to license that character from the company that owns the character, and you guys need to reach some kind of agreement to make it work. Something like that. But so I'm just kind of thinking. So Sega basically must have breached a deal with Nickelodeon to put some of their Nickelodeon IPs and Nickelodeon characters as guest characters in Sonic Racing Crossworlds. You see, so they must have breached an agreement to put SpongeBob and Patrick as DLC, and with Ninja Turtles and Avatar, who are coming down the line in the future. But I think so. I do kind of think the DLC for the Nickelodeon characters, that probably, once the licensing for that expires, the Nickelodeon characters will probably be delisted from the digital store, and you won't be able to buy them anymore. And same could be said for the other video game characters, the other non-Sega video game characters, Mega Man, Pac-Man, and Minecraft. But I don't think those will be much of a problem, honestly, because licensing for video game characters, at least in video games from what I've seen, doesn't seem to be too much of an issue. I think Soul Calibur 6, Soul Calibur 6. I think the DLC for that game is still available on the digital stores. I don't know if those been delisted. I mean, 2B and the Harmaru, I think they're still available to get on the digital store for Soul Calibur 6. Now, Garrett, he was already a part of the base roster, so there's no issue right there. At least if the licensing for Garrett, I think for him expires, and maybe that Soul Calibur 6 might get delisted. Because the thing is, for example, Soul Calibur 4, speaking of Soul Calibur 4, Soul Calibur 4 has Star Wars characters as guest characters, and unfortunately, Soul Calibur 4 unfortunately got delisted from digital stores, mainly because Namco, Bandai Namco, they lost the license to. They lost the license to the Star Wars property, so they had to delist the game from digital stores. And apparently, Soul Calibur 4 has not yet seen a re-release in any shape or form, unlike its predecessors. But even its successors haven't seen a re-release. I think it's kind of a little too early for their successors to see a re-release. Well, mainly 6. I mean, 5 can get a re-release, but seeing how that game did poorly, I highly doubt it. So see, this fact Soul Calibur 4 had guest appearances from movie characters, the Star Wars characters, and the DLC for those characters, because of the Star Wars characters were already available on the base roster, the game had to be delisted because it included the Star Wars characters. And if Namco wants to re-release Soul Calibur 4, they would have to breach an agreement with Disney, who owns Star Wars, so they can re-release Soul Calibur 4 with the Star Wars characters. Or they could probably re-release Soul Calibur 4 without the Star Wars characters, but then again, it would be kind of odd, And the fact of it is, you won't be able to play as, Yoda on the PS3 version or Darth Vader on the 360 version, because they will make DLC for those respective consoles that I mentioned. So, and there's no way to buy the DLC for those characters because since the store, because since that Soul Calibur 4 has been delisted, and you know, the 360 online store has been shut down. The PS3 online store, I think, is still on PlayStation Network. Xbox 360 Live is pretty much gone. No more. Thanos snapped out of existence. So yeah, something like that. So licensing does kind of sometimes tend to kind of like hurt. Does tend to affect the game. So I'm thinking that with the Nickelodeon characters, and especially the fact that Nickelodeon characters aren't particularly video game characters, like it might be the DLC for them might eventually disappear. But I guess it wouldn't be too much a big deal like it have the game be delisted because like let's say if the Nickelodeon characters like if the SpongeBob characters were already a part of the base roster, then Sonic Racing Crossworlds will probably have to be listed because the SpongeBob characters are already in the game. This was actually the case with Jump Force, because Jump Force got delisted because they lost the license to one of the Shonen Jump series, which I hear that it was Dragon Quest Adventures of Die, and Dragon Quest is owned by Square Enix, so I guess I can understand. And heck, so having cartoon characters, comic book characters, anime characters, or even movie characters as DLC characters in your game, that does kind of make a big hurl in the licensing department, compared to video game characters, because the video game characters from what I see, DLC for those do don't tend to disappear quickly. Like let's say a licensing for other characters that are non-video game characters. Like for example, like Mortal Kombat 9. Apparently Freddy Krueger was the reason why Mortal Kombat 9 got delisted from digital stores. But I think Freddy Krueger he was DLC, so I don't know what happened there. But if he was part of the base roster, maybe I can understand why the game would get delisted. But from what I remember, he was DLC. But oh well, I don't know. And also, and also, this could probably be the case with some of the other Mortal Kombat games. Mortal Kombat X, Mortal Kombat 11, and Mortal Kombat 1. I think the DLC characters for those respective games will probably be delisted or something. But I assume they probably released alternate versions, of some of these games. Yeah, so Nickelodeon also, Sonic Racing Crossworlds. If by any chance that the DLC does get delisted, maybe Sega can decide to release an alternate version that has all the DLC in it. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. Could we see that? Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, licensing does play a huge factor. So I'm kind of wondering, how long will the DLC for the guest characters in Sonic Racing Crossworlds, how long will the DLC last? That's exactly what I'm thinking, And also another example I would like to say is Dead or Alive 5, I think. Yeah, Dead or Alive 5. Apparently there was a collaboration with Attack on Titan, and where the characters can have an Attack on Titan outfits, and there's an Attack on Titan stage where you battle on this field, and one of the Titans is watching for the background. And apparently all that got delisted after, listed, and there's pretty much no way you can buy it. And there's no way you can ever, play that DLC ever again, unfortunately, which is a bummer. I guess that DLC is lost forever now. Kind of like other DLCs that some of us, that, like the Star Wars stuff that I mentioned earlier, and some others, I think maybe that's the case with the Sonic Prime characters and Sonic Racing Crossworlds. But, so, in general, we see that sometimes licensing characters, doesn't last forever. I mean, sure, you can renew the contract, and maybe Sega will probably renew the contract with Nickelodeon and some of these other video game IPs, Namco, Capcom, and Microsoft, renew the contracts to keep these characters on board for a lot longer. And then eventually, when they stop supporting the game, they'll probably, probably like give up the license. Because like now with Jump Force, back to Jump Force, while Jump Force did lost license to one of the series, I heard that they did have enough. They probably did that. They did have enough money to renew the license for that series, but they decided not to. But they probably decided not to because since that Jump Force, the player base wasn't doing too well. Stuff around me and stuff that I heard. So, so Jump Force probably still could have continued, and they probably could have, had enough money. They probably had enough money to renew the contract. And I heard rumors that a deal season 3 of Jump Force was probably going to happen, but unfortunately hopefully never materialized, unfortunately, which is a huge bummer. Would have been cool to see. Would have been DLC season 3. And there were a lot of wish lists for season 3. But, so this whole thing got me thinking, like, how long will the DLC for Sonic Racing Crossworlds will last? Like, because, like, we enjoy playing as SpongeBob and Patrick in Racing Crossworlds as well as the stages, But how long will the DLC for those characters last? There could be a possibility that they could get delisted, and even with the Avatar characters and Ninja Turtles characters when those come out as well. And even, I don't think there would be too much of a problem with the Pac-Man, Mega Man, and Minecraft characters because they're pretty much, licensing for them was Spire 2 as well, but, I don't think it will be too much of a struggle or stress to get those characters to come back, to renew the licensing for those. Where, renew the licensing for video game characters we're supposed to, like, cartoon characters or comic book characters or anime characters or movie characters, Well, that's just a thought that I have. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the DLC for Sonic Racing Crossworlds, how long do you think the DLC will last? Do you think that DLC will last for a couple of years or something? I mean, because I'm just thinking, because it does kind of seem like that is, it's easy to license video game characters, other video game characters, depending on the situation, more than it is to license, non-video game characters. But also non-video game characters, they do become the reasons why a game could be delisted from digital stores or the DLC can be delisted. Like if the SpongeBob characters, like if they were playable on the base roster from the beginning, there would be a possibility that Sonic Racing Crossworlds could be delisted from digital stores because the licensing for the Nickelodeon for them could be up, But if they were DLC, which is what they are, only their DLC will be delisted, but the game itself won't be delisted at all. This will be fine, it won't be touched or anything. And also another thing with licensing, there could be disagreements with licensing. Sometimes like either that company that you're licensing with, there could be like a falling out or something, and something tends not to work, and then the deal gets cut. Like Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy, he was supposed to be the guest character in Soul Calibur 2, but unfortunately we don't know what happened. We think that maybe Namco and Square Enix could have reached an agreement or something. I heard that it was licensing disagreements, something like that, and they decided not to add Cloud as a guest character in Soul Calibur 2, and they went with Heihachi instead. We heard that it was going to happen, but at the last minute, disagreements. Maybe Square Enix and Namco had like a disagreement, and so they decided to just pull the plug on the idea about Cloud making it as guest character. Unfortunately, and Heihachi was chosen instead. But it is what it is. And I guess another example I could say, well, this is a video game related, but the whole thing that happened with Spider-Man, Disney, and Sony, that whole fight triangle, love triangle or something, crossover triangle, licensing triangle issue right there, where like after Spider-Man Far From Home, Sony and Disney were having a disagreement, and they decided to just pull Spider-Man out of the MCU, You know, so that's another incident of licensing disagreements right there. Because what if Nickelodeon has like some kind of licensing disagreements with Sega? Nickelodeon could decide to just pull SpongeBob, the Ninja Turtles, and the Avatar characters, you know, out of the DLC, you know, and the DLC for those characters can be delisted, you know, something like that, you know, and maybe that could be the same thing with Capcom, Microsoft, and Namco. You know, what if Sega has a disagreement with them, like either licensing or something? We don't know, you know. Those are just examples, and maybe like you know, Square Enix probably had a licensing disagreement with Shonen Jump and Namco, or maybe it's Bandai Namco because you know, and that's why maybe you know they lost the license for Dragon Quest Adventures of Die and could have used it anymore in Jump Force, and why Jump Force had to be they had to pull the plug on that game, you know. But you know, what do you guys think? You know, do you guys you guys think you guys understand what I'm saying? But I'm pretty sure some of you guys do. But do you guys think that maybe there's probably some stuff that I'm probably missing and probably stuff that I probably don't understand? Because I'll be honest, I don't know too much about the whole thing about licensing, but these are just some bits and pieces that I've kind of got it by watching videos, doing a little bit of research and stuff like that, and understanding and seeing certain things. You know, puzzling it all together. But you can let me know what you think. You know. But how long do you think the DLC for Sonic Racing Crossworlds is going to last? You know, do you think it's going to last for a couple of years, or do you think that maybe there might be a licensing disagreement or something in the future? Or well, let's hope it doesn't, because it is kind of cool to play as these characters. But overall, you let me know what you think. And so yeah, that's it for this video. Let me know what you think. Hope you guys liked it. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. And I'll have more videos coming out in the future. This is Comrade64, signing out. And keep on racing. Later, guys.